And this week we are going to discuss a little bit what it means to be an opposition party in the face of a broader political hegemony, let's say a party or a political movement that attempts to sort of take all comers. Specifically, we're talking about what's happening in Delhi. We've talked a little bit about the politics of the city of Delhi within the broader Indian landscape over the last year. We spoke a little bit about the arrest of Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal and his party, the Aam Aadmi Party's efforts to build a politics of anti-corruption crusading and governance while struggling to take on the ideological project put forward by Prime Minister Modi and the BJP in general. We had Delhi elections last week, and the results were quite overwhelming. The BJP won in a big way for the first time in decades in Delhi, and the Aam Aadmi Party was booted out of power after 10 years of being at the helm. There's a lot to unpack with with Kejriwal himself, with the way that the playing field might have been tilted against the party, but also the mistakes the party made on the ground. And to sort of dig into some of those things, we have with us Dhrubo Jyoti, who is senior editor news operations at the Hindustan Times, one of India's leading newspapers. Thank you for joining us, Dhrubo.
Hi, Rohan. Thank you for having me.
I just wanted to start off asking about the result itself. If you could just tell us tell us a little bit what happened with AAP and the BJP, and whether you found it unexpected, the scale of it, whether it was something that surprised you. How did you react to the result itself?
Sure. Just in terms of Delhi being a relatively small part of the country, right? Even though it's the capital, it only has 70 assembly seats. But it's always punched above its weight in terms of political heft, given its centrality and given the prestige associated with ruling the national capital. This is also a bit of a weird city, given that the salaried class, the so called middle class of India, form a large chunk, about a third of the city. Right. So, this is also a place where, say, the members of India's hierarchical caste system and those at the top, the upper castes, have a substantial electoral voice. Mm, so in many ways, but this is also a city that sees enormous amounts of migration from India's migration sinks from states like Uttar Pradesh or Bihar. So in many ways, it's a kind of a microcosm of this country. The BJP's victory is therefore important, even though it's ruled the country for about now 11 years, because the BJP has never won in Delhi in 27 years. The only election it has won in the city was its first election in 1993. Since then, it's lost three times to the Congress, and two times then to the Aam Aadmi Party. So, therefore, its two-thirds electoral victory is important. It also arrests, after its victories in states like Maharashtra and Haryana, it arrests the impression that the party is sliding because it had an unexpected setback in the 2024 general elections. And more importantly, it strengthens Prime Minister Modi's hand uh, in his assertion that actually all segments of Indians are behind him. It's not just the poor, not just the lower castes, not just the kind of intermediate castes who are known as other backward castes in India, but also actually middle castes and the middle classes who used to be the BJP's core vote bank when it was building itself in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s, but over the last decade appeared to have weaned away a little bit. Yeah. So in that way, I think it's really significant.
Just a comment, which is that you said that this was a relatively small part of the country, and absolutely true. But just for listeners who are maybe less familiar with India, if you could
Sure.
just say the roughly how
Yes.
many people went to the polls, just to give them some context.
I mean, in Indian, I mean, the size, of course, is relative. So in the Delhi electorate, it's about 15.6 million people. The turnout this time was about 60%. So that's about
Right.
9.5 million people. But the relative size is important to understand. So, for example, Delhi has seven parliamentary seats. out of 543 parliamentary seats in the country. Delhi has 70 assembly segments, as opposed to, say, India's largest state, Uttar Pradesh, which has 403 assembly segments. So, in that way, it's a relatively small part of the country,
Right.
even though the absolute numbers are huge.
Yes, I just want, for listeners who tuned in last week, we talked about Slovakia. That was about 5 to 6 million people in the whole country. So we bring you rage
Yes.
here on the political cycle. Okay, so my actual question is, I can remember in 2025, sorry, I can remember back in 2020 when the BJP lost to OP. The narrative was that even though OP had not run against the ideology, had run on, we're going to help, we're going to improve the schools, we're going to improve your basic services. Though they had not run against it, the narrative in some parts of the media, by some in Delhi, by some in the country, was we have beat back this ideology, right? This is an ideological loss for the BJP because the capital did not fall to it. This time, with the BJP winning, I'm seeing, and granted, this is what makes it over, what makes it into English language media over here um, is well, they're Hindu nationalism light. What did you expect? Right? Is the critique that some are hitting the now defeated party with. So I guess
Yes.
just if you can speak a bit about that difference between what maybe the difference between what they run on and what they're perceived as in the election, and
Right.
also whether it matters what you actually run on when the votes have been cast and the dust is settled and the narrative is being formed.
Sure. So I agree that the Aam Aadmi Party's victory in 2020 was kind of over-analyzed as a victory, as a victory of the secular or the liberal against the right wing. Remember that this is a party that was born out of the cauldron of the so-called India Against Corruption movement in the summer of 2011-12, which since then has actually been critiqued as a kind of largely upper caste, middle class kind of urban phenomena, right? So, its leader, Arvind Kejriwal, actually built a large part of his career arguing against affirmative action. Right, so in no way was this party or some of its leaders liberal or in the classical way of understanding what that means. The victory in 2020 was important because the BJP had just won a crushing victory in 2019. 8 months before, and they had swept the parliamentary constituencies, all 7 parliamentary constituencies in Delhi. Then, in the winter of 2019, the country was rocked by protests against an amendment in India's citizenship law that many minority groups, as well as liberals, activists, and a section of the intelligentsia read as being biased against Muslims. And so, in that kind of ferment for the Aam Aadmi Party, and a very polarized campaign in Delhi in 2020, in that kind of ferment for the Aam Aadmi Party, for a very small party still, to beat back an onslaught from the party that is ruling the country and 20 of its 28 states, seemed really, really fairy tale. Mm. The difference this time, I think, are threefold. One is that the BJP did not run an ideological campaign at all. In fact, this was one of, I mean, just in terms of communal rhetoric, I think this has been one of the BJP's least communally charged campaigns. Second, the Delhi campaign ran for about, say, 1.5 months, about 6 to 7 weeks. In the first 2 weeks, the BJP really hammered the Aam Aadmi Party on corruption. Right, in the last 2 years, between 2022 and 2025, almost the entire frontline leadership of the Aam Aadmi Party had been jailed at some point or the other, based on allegations of financial malpractice in an excise or liquor policy. So the BJP tried to nail the app on that, as well as on some exorbitant refurbishments that had been done to the chief minister's residence. And remember that this is a common man's party, right? So they kind of tried to play up dichotomy. Uh, but about 2 weeks into the campaign, I think the BJP realized that the thing that was sticking the most with the people was actually everyday issues. So, for example, over the last 5 years, Delhi has seen incredible civic and governance dysfunction. Some of it is because of the Aam Aadmi Party, but also a large part of it is because Delhi has a very complex governance structure which arrogates very significant powers to Delhi's lieutenant governor, who reports to the union government. And so the last 5 years actually has been spent in this kind of clash over everyday little things between the elected government and the lieutenant governor, which has meant that very everyday things like sanitation, water supply, the person who comes to pick up the garbage from your house, the roads in front of your house, who's going to fix the potholes. These are the sort of things that have really decayed over the last 5 years. Uh, India's urban infrastructure is anyway abysmal, but in that kind of morass, Delhi was actually seen as a city that could aspire to have kind of global standards. In the last 5 years, that sheen is gone. Mm. So the BJP actually did ran a. I kind of switched gears, stayed away from rhetoric, dialed down a little bit on the corruption, and instead dialed up on civic issues. So the victory, for example, might be read more as an anti-AAP or an anti-Arvind Kejriwal, who was the former chief minister, campaign as a verdict, as against a pro-BJP verdict.